Hello everyone. Welcome to the annual Shakespeare Anniversary Lecture hosted by the Shakespeare Society of India East Zone under the aegis of SSI New Delhi. The title of the lecture is Antony and Cleopatra, Momentary Flashes of Nature Counteracting the Historic Abstraction. It is a quotation taken from Coleridge's evaluation of Antony and Cleopatra. The lecture will be delivered by Professor Zenia Mitra of North Bengal University. The latest possible date for Antony and Cleopatra is 1608, when on 20th May a bouquet called Antony and Cleopatra was entered in the stationer's register by Edward Blount, along with the bouquet called the Bouquet of Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Although Blount and the younger Jaggard received a license in November 1623 to include Antony and Cleopatra in the folio among 16 plays not formally entered to other men, a licensing that would normally be unnecessary for a play already registered, scholars are generally satisfied that the 1608 entry refers to the play we know. But first and foremost, I would like to welcome Professor Vinod Kumar Singh, Secretary of SSI New Delhi, who will be delivering the introductory lecture.
Hello everyone. My greetings to Shakespeare lovers and scholars on the occasion of Shakespeare's birth anniversary, and my thanks to Dr. Nanade, Secretary Northeast Zone, the Shakespeare Society of India, for organizing this event and inviting me to be part of it. The topic of today's lecture is Momentary Flashes of Nature Counteracting the Historic Abstraction. The topic is borrowed from Coleridge's reading of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, and when I go through this reading, two questions come to my mind. First pertains to the nature of depiction of nature itself in the play, and the second pertains to the depiction as well as the said abstraction therein. The answer to the first question appears to be rather obvious. Those who are familiar with the text will readily agree with me that the depiction of nature in the play is genuinely lofty and rather sublime. There are a number of critics, right from G. Wilson Knight and Theodore Spencer, etc. They repeatedly acknowledge this. They see a correspondence between the microcosm of the word with the larger microcosm. They also see an inherent transcendental humanism in the play. But the answer to the second question appears to be rather challenging. But it is indeed very intriguing, and in order to answer this question, we need to go through the trajectory of Shakespeare as a playwright, right from the beginning to the point when he wrote Antony and Cleopatra. And if you closely observe, then we find that Shakespeare has been hitherto consistently busy with political issues of particular sort. That is, political issues related to monarchical system of governance. But with Antony and Cleopatra, he makes a paradigm shift In Antony and Cleopatra, he is said to depict larger political organization. And as per my understanding, in this shift from monarchical to imperial, we can see the necessity for Shakespeare's to adopt and appropriate a new set of imagery and language. And from this perspective, we can also see the necessity of historic abstraction that we find in Antony and Cleopatra. We all know that the story of Antony and Cleopatra is borrowed from Plutarch's history of noble Greek and Romans, and this happened to be a true story from the ancient Roman history. But despite the fact that Shakespeare largely rely on Plutarch's, he does not strictly adheres to the source. Instead, he take the poetic license and make obvious changes there in the play. And this can be seen in his account of the story of Antony and Cleopatra. This can be seen in the depiction of the protagonist itself in the play. While Antony in Plutarch is every bit human, Shakespeare has made his protagonist a demigod. So that kind of changes that we find therein, and we can understand the necessity behind such changes, appropriation and abstraction in the change that Shakespeare made in the thematic matters, basically. In his shift from monarchical to imperial themes. And this is my understanding of the historic abstraction that we find therein. The speaker for the day, Dr. Mitra, will further elaborate and will give further insight into the play. I wish you all a wonderful session with her. And again, thank the organizers for organizing the event. Thank you all. Namaskar.
Unfortunately, due to some medical issues at home, the president of SSI, Professor Yogesh Kumar Dubey, could not join us this year. So I will now move on to Dr. Zenia Mitra, who will be delivering the Shakespeare Anniversary Lecture. Dr. Zenia Mitra is Professor of English of North Bengal University and the first person to chair the Mother Teresa Chair for Peace at St. Xavier's University, Kolkata. She served as the first head of the Department of Women's Studies NBU and was also the director of the Center for Women's Studies at the University of North Bengal. Her areas of research interest are poetry, feminism, and South Asian literature. She has authored several books, including Indian Poetry in English, Critical Studies, Poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, Imagery and Experiential Identity, and the Concept of Motherhood in India, Myths, Theories and Realities, Fourth Wave Feminism, Social Media and Slacktivism. Mitra has served as co-editor for 20th Century British Literature, Reconstructing Literary Sensibility, Interact FYUG. She has contributed articles and reviews to national and international academic journals. She is a poet and a translator Her poetry volumes include Some Words Never Sleep from Indie Blue, Pennsylvania, and Fern Tunes, Hornbill. Her translations have been published in books and journals such as Indian Literature from Sahitya Academy, Bratto Boshu's collected plays Yapan Chitra and Porobash. Her translation of Jyotinet Juto by Shukumar Roy is included in the ICSE textbook A Magic Place. She was part of project on duothnography under the Australian Association of Writing program, project consultant on prevention of trafficking and strengthening community-based child protection mechanism for UNICEF 2023-24, and served as the North Bengal resource person for project Preserving Folk Tales and Folklore in the Himalayan region under the Fine Arts Society, New Delhi. She is on the editorial boards of academic journals and editorial board member of Tista Review, an international journal of poetry. Over to Professor Xenia Mitra.
Good evening. I thank the Shakespeare Society of India East Zone and Dr. Naina De, Secretary, Shakespeare Society East Zone, for inviting me to this talk. My talk is titled Antony and Cleopatra, Momentary Flashes of Nature, Counteracting Historic Abstraction. I will begin with a letter written by Duchess Margaret Cavendish to Princess Lady Marchioness of Newcastle in 1664. She writes, I believe that Antonius and Brutus did not speak better to the people than he had feigned them. He is, of course, William Shakespeare. Nay, one would think, the letter continues, that he had been metamorphosed from a man to a woman. For who could describe Cleopatra better than he had done? This better is in capital. This letter appears in Shakespeare Criticism Selection by Nicole Smith. I begin with Margaret Cavendish's letter because she had spoken my words back in 1664. Coleridge found that of all Shakespeare's historical plays, Antony and Cleopatra was by far the most wonderful. There is not another historical play where he has followed history so minutely, and yet, Coleridge writes, there are few in which he impresses the notion of angelic strength so much, perhaps none in which he impresses it more strongly. This is greatly owing to the manner in which the fiery force is sustained throughout, and to the numerous momentary flashes of nature counteracting the historic abstraction. The title of my talk is taken from Coleridge's Shakespeare Criticism, which is edited by Thomas Middleton Rayson, Volume 1, Harvard University Press. I will return to the momentary flashes of nature, but let us have a brief introduction to the play, its historic abstraction, and then it is also tempting to delve into discussion on Cleopatra briefly, the woman whom age cannot wither, nor custom stale her infinite variety, for other women cloy the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry where she most satisfies. And also briefly into Antony, as their fates are intertwined. In several evident and overarching manners, Antony and Cleopatra is like William Shakespeare's other tragedies. The theatrical production was first enacted in 1607 by the King's Men at the Blackfriars Theatre or Globe Theatre. Its inaugural printed edition occurred in the first folio, released in 1623, under the title The Tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. The narrative is based on Thomas North's 1579 English rendition of Plutarch's Lives from Ancient Greek. The play delineates the intricate relationship between Cleopatra and Mark Antony, commencing with the Sicilian revolt and culminating in Cleopatra's demise following the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Similar to Richard II, Julius Caesar, and Coriolanus, this work is both a tragic narrative and a historical drama, a product of creative imagination informed by historical records that depict individuals who once existed within specific circumstances in which they are portrayed. Historically, the events involving Antony and Cleopatra unfold over a decade, which is condensed by Shakespeare to accommodate the exigencies of the performance. Antony here is evidently older than his portrayal in Julius Caesar, and his political acumen appears to be diminishing. Shakespeare presents Cleopatra here as a woman possessing both tenderness and strength, thereby providing a stark contrast to certain historical representations that depict her as manipulative. Shakespeare also introduces Octavia to function as a foil, a counterpoint to Cleopatra, thereby heightening the dichotomy between Roman integrity and Egyptian fervor. According to Plutarch, Octavia Caesar had an attractive personality, received extensive admiration from women, and was inclined to womanizing. In contrast, Shakespeare's portrayal of Octavius presents him as a thorough politician, devoid of any emotional affection except for his sister Octavia. These alterations render Octavius a more austere and quintessentially a Roman figure than the one depicted by Plutarch. And Cleopatra was a far more accomplished individual than what is implied within Shakespeare's narrative. Plutarch characterizes her as both fervent and capricious, also proficient in several Eastern languages, and adept in political maneuvering. As in Romeo and Juliet, both the central characters of the play meet their demise in swift succession, which is primarily attributable to a convergence of selfless love and adverse circumstances. But also, in contrast to Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra presents characters who undergo an extended period of suffering upon which Shakespeare lingers. The play can be read, can be interpreted as a sequel to Julius Caesar, in spite of the fact that Antony and Cleopatra was composed significantly later in Shakespeare's oeuvre than Julius Caesar. And in Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare delves more profoundly into the intricacies of historical narrative and critically examines the foundations upon which heroic reputations are established than he had done in his earlier historical dramas pertaining to English or Roman history. I agree with David Reed. I absolutely agree with David Reed here, who writes in his essay, Disappearing at the Role of Anabarbus in Antony and Cleopatra, that it is an elusive play, difficult for audiences and readers to grasp as a whole at the level of either plot or theme, and it is challenging both to study and teach in ways that other major tragedies are not. The action of the story started long ago, on the Ides of March 44 BCE. The rage created by Antony's speech which was shrewdly delivered but basically poured out from a profound hurt following Caesar's assassination by the senators of Rome, swayed public opinion and sparked a civil war. You may look up Antony's reference to slippery people in the play. Antony was one of Julius Caesar's generals throughout his conquest of Gaul. While Caesar wiped off political rivals in Greece, North Africa, and Spain, Antony was named administrator of Italy. Following Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Antony formed a three-man dictatorship with Marcus Lepidus, another of Caesar's generals, and Octavius Caesar, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, to rule over Rome. This is known to history as the Second Triumvirate. The First Triumvirate was a political alliance formed in 60 BCE between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great and Marcus Gracius. In Julius Caesar, Antony is unquestionably politically savvy. He succeeds in his goal of inciting insurgents and toppling the Republicans so that he and Octavius Caesar may fill the void. He consistently exhibits ambition, self-assurance, success, extraordinary ruthlessness. There are references to both Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar in Cleopatra's speech. What we see in Antony here is a much transformed Roman general under the influence of Cleopatra. Shakespeare here demonstrates a markedly distinct perspective regarding the Roman historical content. Regarding history retold, it is interesting to note that the crucial moments of history here always unfold off stage, unlike ancient Greek drama, where violence and death were typically depicted off stage and reported by messengers or characters rather than being visually staged. Shakespeare's method of handling all historical highlights is curiously indirect here. Whenever the dramatic current appears to surge towards an iconic event, like the battle at Actium or the wedding of Antony and Octavia, and the scenes shift away, leaving the audience to depend on characters like Enobarbus or messengers to recount the events for us. Or we are taken directly to a scene where we know that these events have already happened. This deliberate sidestepping of grand history and its procession of happenings sets this play apart from historical works such as Julius Caesar, for instance, or other plays that delve into history, because in Julius Caesar, for instance, we see that the assassination of Caesar is vividly portrayed. Antony's return to Cleopatra goes undramatized. His first meeting with Cleopatra, or Antony's valor, the warrior Antony of bygone days, who would drink the stale of horses and feed on strange flesh, is not enacted on stage, but yet is vividly brought to life through the accounts of characters who have witnessed it. When Cleopatra and Antony seat themselves in chairs of gold with all their heirs at their feet, and he declares her absolute queen of Syria, Cyprus, Lydia, it is given to us in vivid details by Octavius Caesar. In this play, that primarily stages the grand passion of Antony and Cleopatra, history is woven into it through succinct historical tales retold by characters and reported by messengers. Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra much later in his career, and in this work, a more mature Shakespeare here delves deeper than the surface of historical narrative. Whereas Shakespeare's preceding dramatization of Roman history emphasized the conflicts intrinsic to Roman governance, this work addresses the political dynamics of an expansive empire that encompasses the Mediterranean region. Whereas political thought and civic obligation are the core arguments in Julius Caesar, in Antony and Cleopatra, these are complicated by attention to sensual experience and private life of the Roman general and the Egyptian queen. Cleopatra's reference to Antony's sword Philippon, which was used at the Battle of Philippi, the battle that ends Julius Caesar, is in an erotic play of words. In this play, Shakespeare is interested to explore not only deeper than the socio-political fabric into the erotic love of Antony and Cleopatra, beyond the drama of, say, Fulvia's death, his marriage to Octavia, and then his eventual return to Cleopatra, deserting Octavius Caesar's sister, knowing fully well the consequences that would follow, beyond the mundane plane of existence where there is lovers' quarrel, there is lovers' misunderstanding, into something transcendental, which we may call momentary flashes of nature. If we agree that what is celebrated in Antony and Cleopatra is the passionate surrender to an illicit love, the victory of Antony and Cleopatra's love over practical, political, and moral concerns, and the final superiority of the suicide of the lovers over the defeating circumstances. W.K. Wimsatt Jr. points out that it is a crudely one sided statement. There is far more, he points out. He points to the complex, the wanton, the subtle wiles of the voluptuous queen, her infinite variety, and grizzled, generous manhood and military bravery of Antony, the whole opulent, the burnished panorama of the empire and its corruptions. What remains unarticulated is that the characters of Antony and Cleopatra cannot be circumscribed by circumstances, confined within the situational contexts in which they exist. To articulate the transcendence of the mundane in Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare endeavors to penetrate a dimension of reality that eludes facile understanding, particularly by the Roman minds conditioned by Roman idea of discipline, ambition, ruthlessness. Shakespeare employs imagery to convey this imagery of dissolution, of divinity, the ethereal. He employs hyperbole that serve as a mechanism for transcending and dismantling confines of expression. Cleopatra is made to express a vast array of emotions, ranging from euphoric delight and uncontrollable fury to profound despair. She is contrasted with the Roman ideal of measure that expresses the moderation, the average. The intensity of love she shares with Antony is understood by Antony as nothing short of the transcendental. Eternity was on our lips and eyes, bliss in our brows bent, none our paths so poor but was a race of heaven. Shakespeare implies that Antony has acquired this mode of expression from Cleopatra, and it is Cleopatra and only Cleopatra who has awakened him to a love that can transcend all other mundane concerns. In the plane of historic events, Antony represents the tragic decline of a captain, the downfall of a ruler, who has yielded control over a significant portion of the Roman Empire, and this we are compelled to examine as meticulously as possible. I mean, look closely, look very closely at the intricate dynamics of this process. The ineffective military strategy, the lack of resolve, the futile negotiations contrast sharply with Octavius Caesar's unwavering intellect. But Antony is a generous individual who generously refunds all his wealth with excess abundance to Enoburbus when he abandons him. Yet Antony forfeits his personal integrity when he flees from the Battle of Actium or even betrays Octavia for Cleopatra without any explanation to her. These elements serve to illustrate, if we look too much, too closely for consistency in a character, a line by Roy Fuller in Ice of March, I merely choose what history foretells. As for Cleopatra, never was a woman more beautiful than in poet's imagination. And if we look for particular examples, one of the leading examples will be Shakespeare's imagination of Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the last actively reigning Hellenistic pharaoh. She co-governed Egypt with her brother Ptolemy XIV from 30 BCE onwards. She engaged in a relationship with Julius Caesar, gave birth to a son whom she named Caesarion. Cleopatra journeyed to Rome as a client monarch in 46 and 44 BCE, resided at Caesar's villa during her stay. After Caesar's assassination and shortly thereafter with the unexpected death of Ptolemy XIV, potentially orchestrated by Cleopatra, she designated Caesarion as her co-ruler. She met Antony at Tarsus in 31 BCE. The two power players convened to strategize on optimizing their respective interests. The queen entered into a romantic relationship with Antony, gave birth to three heirs. The donations of Alexandria proclaimed their progeny as sovereigns over various regions under Antony's jurisdiction. Antony increasingly depended on Cleopatra for both financial support and military assistance throughout his campaigns against the Parthian Empire and Kingdom of Armenia. In The Newly Born Woman, Helen Sixou and Catherine Clement critique the patriarchal frameworks that restrict women to a predetermined woman's place. Cleopatra epitomizes a woman who actively defies patriarchal domination. The feminine imaginary, along a woman's focus on liberation from the prevailing social constructs, is a rebellion against a reality which is predicated upon the master-slave paradigm and the systematic repression exclusion of otherness. Helen Sixou, in Soti's Out and Out, attacks, weighs out, forays, characterizes Cleopatra as unique, for she embodies not only beauty but also an inestimable intelligence, wholly dedicated to the pursuits of life, love, invention, and creation. She can transform a single emotion into myriad forms of beauty, a single joy into countless games, and a solitary pain into an expansive surge of passion. She is life personified as woman. She is woman realized as art. Cleopatra's beauty is described by Enoburbus in Act 2, Scene 2, where he informs his audience, Lepidus, Agrippa, and Maecenas, about Antony and Cleopatra's first meeting. He describes how this exceptional relationship between Antony and Cleopatra began, conjuring up a beautiful image of the details of their first meeting. The barge she sat in like a burnished throne burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke and made the water which they beat to follow faster as amorous of their strokes. That was only her barge. And now Cleopatra. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion cloth of gold of tissue, over picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty dimpled boys like smiling cupids, with divers coloured fans whose wind did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool, and what they undid did. She is rare for Antony. She is also a rare Egyptian. Antony had invited her to dinner, but she in turn invited him. And we read that having barbered 10 times over, Antony went to the feast and paid with his heart for what his eyes eat only. In this passage, Shakespeare follows Plutarch in closer details than anywhere else in the play. The barge, river Cydnus, gold, silver, flutes, Cleopatra's comparison to goddess Venus, fair boys fanning her who were like cupids. The description comes as a relief to us after the account of excesses of sleeping through the day and drinking at night lifestyle reported to us, after descriptions of feasts more extravagant than 8 wild boars roasted for breakfast for 12 reported to us, and after the large Roman disapprovals like the word nay that begins the play. We hear of Cleopatra's tawny front and gypsy's lust. The slurs, in fact, accumulate throughout the play. Gypsy, wrangling queen, slave, Egyptian dish, whore, salt Cleopatra. Also, Antony, who had reasons to feel betrayed after the Battle of Actium and reception of Theseus, cries out, "Foul Egyptian, triple turned whore." Triple turned whore involves Julius Caesar and also involves Pompey the Great. It is interesting to note that Cleopatra never makes any attempt to hide the fact that she had partnered with Caesar and Pompey. She is representative of Egyptian culture. For a thorough and visually compelling contrast, the cultural paradigms of Rome and Egypt are juxtaposed against one another. Antony's deterioration in rationality, a cognitive attribute linked to masculinity, and his intense indecisiveness throughout the play are associated with his extended stay in Egypt. In the play, numerous scenes illuminate the intricate dynamics between gender and ethnicity. Antony serves as a representation of the masculine West, while Cleopatra exemplifies the exotic, the feminine East. Upon a cursory analysis, Antony and Cleopatra appears to confirm to the paradigms of an Orientalist perspective, intricately weaving together the ramifications of gender stratification with imperial hierarchy. Look at Cleopatra's attendants. Look at Mardian. We have seen the dimpled boys on the barge. Antony's sexual conquest of Cleopatra appears to symbolize the domination of Egypt by Rome. But in this play, nothing is so simple. For Cleopatra is also a sharp and controlling figure who enchants the Roman triumvir, and this poses a formidable challenge to the patriarchal Roman Empire. Antony, the Roman military commander, becomes so entangled in the relationship that he is perceived as diminished to a woman in the eyes of Caesar and his compatriots. But I will not discuss this aspect of the play in details, for I need to catch up with what interests me more, the flashes of nature. Profusion, energy, exuberance. That is how Cleopatra is described in The Newly Born Woman. The more you have, the more you give, the more you are, the more you give, the more you have. Life opens up and stretches to infinity, and Antony is not left behind. Although he might have had a hard time keeping up with Cleopatra in the realm of invention, he wins in another, generosity. The one that for a man consists of daring to strip himself of power and glory and to love and admire a woman enough to take pride happily in rivaling with her in passion. To me, however, it is Antony who opens the gateway to the flashes of nature before Cleopatra. In the initial scene, while other characters engage in disparaging remarks regarding Antony and Cleopatra, the lovers are wholly engrossed in romance. Cleopatra endeavors to gauge the magnitude of Antony's affection, to which he articulates that love that can be measured is intrinsically inadequate. There is beggary in love that can be reckoned. One must strive to unearth new celestial realms and domains to fully grasp the depth of his love. By the end of the play, it becomes evident that the lovers have indeed unearthed new heaven and earth. When Antony is away to Rome, Cleopatra must know every details of him, musing whether he is standing or sitting or riding a horse. She has to send every day a several greetings. She will unpeople Egypt. She displays no interest in the gift that Antony sends her through Alexis, but wants to know if he was sad or merry when he left. Antony cannot stay away for long. He makes it explicit that though I make this marriage for my peace, in the east my pleasure lies. The lovers are like Van Gogh paintings. They transmit a vision more than objects and events, an imagination turned into reality, just as the human effort, the imperfections and perfections of the paintings create a reality with the broad strokes that make them visionary flashes of nature. They give us a brief glimpse into the reality beyond the mundane. Antony and Cleopatra here explore to the fullest the capacity of love to transform ordinary experience. Philo compares Antony to Mars, and Cleopatra is compared to Venus. Cleopatra, expressing Antony's duality, declares, though he be painted one way like Gorgon, the other way is a Mars. Shakespeare alludes to the passionate relationship between Venus and Mars here. Antony is Demi-Atlas, and Cleopatra the serpent of old Nile. As the play proceeds, Antony is more like Hercules, and Cleopatra is Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic and fertility, which adds to her mystique and reinforces the play's exploration of Egyptian culture. These allusions function to elevate two principal protagonists to an almost divine stature, imbuing the play with a layer of theatrical grandeur, creating a sense of wonder and spectacle. It is Antony who articulates the final principle of the play, final principle myth of the play, which resonates with classical antecedents. Convinced of Cleopatra's death, he devises a plan to reunite with her, where souls to couch on flowers will hand in hand, and with our sprightly poet make the ghosts gaze. Dido and her Aeneas shall want troops, and all the haunt be ours. When Aeneas descended into the underworld and encountered Dido, she had averted her gaze from him instead of uniting with him. However, Shakespeare consistently and consciously chooses to depict an ideal of eternal love. This posthumous love is reserved for the lovers here. In the essence of Antony, Shakespeare captures Plutarch's insight that the soul of a lover lived in another body and not in his own. Antony's heart-rending realization of his lack of dominion and mastery over his own fate upends the conflicting moral landscape that shapes the idea of heroism. Moreover, it incisively unravels the justification of colonialism, where a prevailing force obscures another culture and value system. Rather, Antony becomes profoundly aware of the complex interplay between the self and the other amidst the rich tapestry of love, politics, and morality. That which is now a horse, even with a thought, the rack dislins and makes it indistinct, as water is in water. In this play, Shakespeare revisits a motif present in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the ability of imagination to transmute commonplace experiences. However, whereas the lovers in the prior play were influenced by the coercive power of love potions, the more seasoned lovers here, that is, Antony and Cleopatra, seem to possess an acute awareness of their commitment to Eros and their capacity to alter the trajectory of history through their actions. Antony and Cleopatra assert the notion of love as a potent force that dismantles entrenched boundaries and also established identities. In the ornate language that defines romantic rhetoric, Antony rejects Cleopatra's assertions with his famous words, "Let Rome in Tiber melt." The dissolution of Rome into River Tiber will elicit no response from him, as his existence now is fundamentally shaped by Cleopatra's presence. He questions the significance of empire, pondering what it amounts to, if not mere clay. What nobility can be derived from governing over dungy earth, which possesses no inherent virtue and yields its produce to both beasts and humans alike? True nobility resides within our passions, and Antony's passion is Cleopatra. Upon receiving the message of Antony's marriage with Octavia, Cleopatra utilizes similar rhetorical devices, thus echoing Antony's previous assertion and further emphasizing the gradual disintegration of the world. Melt Egypt into Nile, and kindly creatures turn all to serpents. Cleopatra asserts that her being would collapse if she were to display a detached attitude towards Antony, which highlights the depth of their passion and the fundamental ability of it to overwhelm them. Discandy is used twice in the play, further emphasizing the theme of melting and dissolving. As Antony prepares to die, he talks of clouds that change shape. Sometimes I see a cloud that's dragonish, a vapor. This is, for me, the fullest expression in the play of transformation and melting. Hamlet also discusses the changing shapes of clouds with Polonius. After Antony's death, Cleopatra declares that the crown of the earth is melting, suggesting the end of an era and the instability of power and order. The drama culminates in the scene of Cleopatra's death with her speech that incorporates, "Husband, I come." Shakespeare gives it a grand beginning. "Give me my robe, put on my crown. I have immortal longings in me." She chooses to leave the moral abode with, "I am fire and air. Other elements I give to baser life." There is this sense of superior life, a feeling of elevated existence, that the lovers are embarking on a journey. Cleopatra's oration is followed by that of Charmian. She says, "Dissolve thick clouds and rain, that I may say the gods themselves weep." This heightened emotional surge, this elevated dialogue, is intentionally employed by Shakespeare to infuse vigor into lovers' ardor. By acknowledging the ever-shifting tapestry of time, Antony's plea to be a child of the time subtly highlights the challenges involved in depicting historical moments that are in a perpetual flux. The play masterfully critiques conventional historical narratives. Although Octavius Caesar is the triumphant conqueror who vanquishes Antony to rise as the emperor of Rome, the final act of the play underscores not his triumph but the splendor of Cleopatra. I hear him mock the luck of Caesar. She achieves a magnificence that leaves Caesar looking like scarce bearded young boy who is deprived of the sight of the truth that can be seen only by Antony and Cleopatra through these flashes of nature. It is noteworthy that in their final moments, both Antony and Cleopatra refer to an afterlife. Antony says, "Where souls do couch on flowers will hand in hand." And Cleopatra says that she has immortal longings. She cries, "Husband, I come." Even though the play does not furnish a coherent belief system to underpin these representations of reunion. The play provides a theatrical apotheosis as the new heaven and new earth open up, as existing beyond the mundane to elucidate the profundity of Cleopatra and Antony's love. Coleridge employed the expression "flashes of nature" to articulate the instances in the play where the characters' genuine, unfiltered passions and yearnings surge forth, breaking through the veneer of historical backdrop. Coleridge believed that these eruptions of nature act as a powerful antidote to the more rigid historical framework of the play, rendering the characters and their conflicts feel strikingly urgent and ethereal. Thank you. Thank you.